Because revenge might feel satisfying momentarily, but it doesn't create lasting change. Transformation does. That evening's closing dinner was held on the beach, with torches illuminating tables set directly on the sand. As the meal concluded, I rose to address the group, feeling a sense of purpose I'd been lacking for far too long. 3 years ago, I made a choice to hide part of my identity in pursuit of authentic achievement, I began. I wanted to succeed or fail based on my own merits, not my family name. I glanced around at the attentive faces. What I discovered instead was how privilege operates in subtle ways, even when you try to set it aside. My experience at Horizon opened my eyes to challenges that many face without the safety net I've always had, regardless of how I lived my daily life. Richard sat with his gaze lowered as I continued. Moving forward, Horizon Marketing will be implementing new policies to ensure truly equitable opportunities for advancement. We'll also be launching a partnership with the Sullivan Foundation to provide paid internships and mentorships for students without family connections or traditional advantages in our industry. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. Whether it was genuine support or recognition of the new power dynamics, I wasn't sure, but the seed had been planted. 6 months later, I sat in what had once been Richard's office, now mine, after his conveniently timed health-related departure. I reviewed the quarterly results with satisfaction. Under my leadership as president, Horizon had not only implemented comprehensive diversity policies, but also increased profitability by 34%. My office remained simply furnished, no status symbols or expensive art. My clothes were still chosen for quality and practicality rather than designer labels. The difference now was that these choices represented authentic values rather than the need for concealment. On my desk sat a small piece of coral in a glass display, a reminder of that pivotal retreat. Beside it was a photo of my father and me, standing with the first group of foundation interns who had joined Horizon the previous month. The intercom buzzed, and my assistant's voice came through. "Your father is online. Something about planning next year's company retreat." I smiled as I picked up the phone. Some things had changed dramatically, but the most important things had remained the same. "Hi, Dad," I answered. "I was just thinking about you. Have you ever felt like you've worked so hard, put in your best effort only to be overlooked or underestimated?" That was me, day after day. I built my career from scratch, away from the shadow of my family's name, wanting to prove myself. But in one instant, everything changed. A retreat meant to reward the best of the best became the moment I realized that no matter how much I achieved on my own, some people would still judge me based on who my father is. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just someone's daughter. I was ready to take control of my own destiny and show them just how wrong they were. Join me as I take you through this journey of proving your worth, reclaiming your power, and teaching a lesson that would leave everyone speechless. My boss uninvited me from the company's luxury retreat, telling me that my presence would lower the caliber of attendees. He nearly collapsed when the manager of the island resort welcomed me as the owner's daughter and showed everyone to the presidential villa I had reserved in my name. The words "your presence would bring down the caliber of attendees" lingered in the air like toxic smoke as I stood frozen in Richard's doorway, my professional smile still fixed on my face while something inside me cracked. Richard leaned back in his Italian leather chair, his fingers steepled, wearing that expression I'd come to recognize. False sympathy barely concealing smug satisfaction. "I just don't think you're executive material yet, Emma," he said, his voice carrying just loudly enough for the curious ears in the open office beyond. "The Sullivan Island Resort is extremely exclusive. Our clients expect a certain level of polish," he added, his gaze flicking dismissively over my sensible navy blazer and practical pumps. The irony might have been comical if it weren't so painful. Sullivan Island Resort, my father's crowning achievement, named after our family, was the place where I spent childhood summers, helping the staff fold towels and learning to swim. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. If you've ever felt overlooked despite your talents, today's story of a brilliant marketing executive facing workplace discrimination might hit close to home. If you enjoy tales of reclaiming your power and standing in your truth, hit subscribe. It's free and helps our community grow. Now let's watch as Emma's boss discovers exactly whose daughter he's been underestimating. I am Emma Sullivan, daughter of Robert Sullivan, the reclusive resort magnate as the business press calls him, I replied evenly, though my heartbeat hammered in my ears. Thank you for the clarification, I added, walking back to my desk through the maze of suddenly busy co-workers, pretending not to have overheard everything. I maintained perfect posture, another lesson from my father. Never let them see weakness, Emmy. The moment they smell blood, they'll tear you apart. 3 years ago, fresh out of my MBA program, where I'd graduated at the top of my class, I made a decision that confused everyone who knew my background. Instead of taking my rightful place in the Sullivan Hospitality Group empire, I chose a mid-level position at a modest marketing agency. My father was puzzled but supportive. "Find your own path," he had said. "That's a luxury my money should afford you." I'd watched wealth isolate him over the years, with people either wanting something from him or being too intimidated to be authentic. His 3 failed marriages were testament to how money complicated human connection. I was determined to succeed or fail on my own merits, to know that the relationships I built were genuine. My apartment in the unfashionable part of town was comfortable but unremarkable. My 5-year-old Honda was reliable but unimpressive. My wardrobe consisted of quality basics rather than designer labels. These weren't hardships to me. They were choices that reflected my values. Richard Blackwell, however, interpreted my lack of status symbols as a lack of ambition, perhaps even ability. "The Henderson Beauty campaign mock-ups need revision," Lisa from accounts said, dropping a folder on my desk, interrupting my thoughts. "Richard wants them by morning." The Henderson campaign, my campaign, had already been approved by the client last week. These revisions were undoubtedly Richard's attempt to keep me too busy to dwell on my exclusion from the retreat. "Of course," I replied with a professional nod. This was familiar territory. Last month it had been my concept for the Mitchell sports drink campaign that Richard presented to the client himself, conveniently forgetting to mention that the entire campaign framework had been mine. The month before, I'd been mysteriously uninvited from the final pitch meeting for the Wilson retail account after developing their entire rebrand strategy. Richard had a particular talent for undermining me without leaving any evidence. The women's cosmetics accounts, the household products, the softer brands, those always seemed to land on my desk, regardless of my proven track record with technology clients and financial services. My computer pinged with an email notification from Margot Winters, the newly hired VP of Client Relations. "Can you drop by my office at 4? I want to discuss your thinking on Apex." Brilliant work, MW. This message alone would send Richard into a strategic panic. Margot had witnessed my presentation on digital transformation strategy last week and had asked several insightful questions. Unlike Richard, she had openly acknowledged the depth of my research and the innovation in my approach. That single moment of professional recognition had felt like rain in a desert. Richard had noticed our connection immediately. His eyes had narrowed during the meeting as Margot engaged with my ideas, and afterward he'd hovered nearby when she complimented my work, quickly interjecting himself into the conversation. As I gathered my notes for the meeting with Margot, I caught Richard watching me from across the office, his expression calculating. He'd been increasingly agitated since I landed the Apex Technologies account, a major tech firm that had specifically requested me after seeing my work on a smaller project. The Apex win should have been celebrated, but Richard had immediately assigned Tyler and Jason to support me. "You'll need backup on this one, Emma," he had said with a tight smile. It's a big account for someone at your level. Both men were junior to me in experience and position, but they were unquestionably members of Richard's boy club, frequently invited to his golf outings and whiskey tastings. Their addition to my project wasn't support, it was dilution. A transparent attempt to split the credit 3 ways when success came, or to have scapegoats if anything went wrong. Margot's office door was open when I arrived, and she waved me in with genuine warmth. "Emma, come in. I've been reviewing your Apex proposal again. The integration of AI predictive analytics with traditional consumer behavior models is fascinating." For the next 30 minutes, we engaged in the kind of substantive professional conversation I'd been craving. No politics, no posturing, just an authentic exchange of ideas. When she suggested becoming more involved with the Apex account, I felt something dangerous. Hope. "Richard mentioned you won't be joining us at the retreat next week," Margot said as our meeting concluded. "That's disappointing. It would be valuable to have your perspective." My carefully constructed professional mask nearly slipped. So Richard had already been laying the groundwork, likely suggesting I decline the invitation due to some personal inadequacy. "Yes, unfortunately, I won't be attending," I replied neutrally. "Well, we'll catch up when we return," she said with a smile that seemed genuine. "I see tremendous potential in your work, Emma." As I walked back to my desk, I noticed Richard emerging from the conference room with Tyler and Jason, all 3 laughing comfortably. They quieted when I approached, exchanging glances. "Emma," Richard said with artificial brightness, "the guys have had some great ideas for the Apex campaign. We're thinking of pivoting from your original concept, more dynamic, more cutting edge. We can discuss it when I'm back from the retreat." And there it was, the familiar pattern. The retreat would happen without me, decisions would be made in my absence, and my work would be repackaged under someone else's name. But this time would be different. The Sullivan Island Resort wasn't just another luxury destination. It was my legacy, my history, my name literally carved into the foundation stone. As Richard walked away, I made my decision. For 3 years, I had hidden in the shadows of my privilege, rejecting it in pursuit of authentic achievement. But perhaps it was time to step into the light on my own terms. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to a number I rarely used. "Dad, we need to talk about the company retreat next week at the resort. I have a favor to ask." Dad didn't call back immediately, which was typical. He was probably in some high-level meeting or perhaps taking his evening swim in the private cove at our family's main estate. Over the years, I'd grown accustomed to delayed responses, understanding that his empire demanded constant attention. So I tucked my phone away and focused on reworking the Henderson campaign mock-ups that didn't actually need reworking. The next morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill. I was already at my desk by 7:30, a full hour before most colleagues would arrive. When my phone finally lit up with my father's response, I felt a cold rush. Interesting timing. That location was specifically requested by someone at Horizon. "Call me after your all-hands meeting today." My blood ran cold. The monthly all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and I hadn't mentioned it to my father. Somehow he already knew about it. Typical Robert Sullivan. Always 3 steps ahead with information that should have been impossible to obtain. It was both impressive and unnerving. By 9:55, the glass-walled conference room was filling with the entire Horizon marketing staff. I selected a seat halfway back, visible enough to be present, but far enough to avoid unwanted attention. Richard stood at the front, practically bouncing on his toes with barely contained excitement, while his assistant Julia arranged branded gift bags on a side table. "Good morning, team." Richard's voice boomed with theatrical enthusiasm as the clock struck 10. "Before we dive into department updates, I have a special announcement that I've been absolutely dying to share." He clicked to his first slide, a stunning aerial photograph of a lush tropical island with pristine beaches, and an architectural marvel perched on its hillside. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that exact view. It was the marketing shot I'd helped approve 3 years ago for the Sullivan Island Resort brochures. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard continued, "as a reward for our exceptional Q3 performance, Horizon's top performers will be attending a 4-day executive retreat at the exclusive Sullivan Island Resort." The room erupted in excited murmurs. Sullivan Island Resort was notorious for its exclusivity, with waiting lists extending months, even for the wealthiest clients. Celebrities sought its privacy, tech billionaires its discretion, and politicians its security. The average person would never set foot on its immaculate shores. "Sullivan Island Resort," Richard continued, clearly relishing being the bearer of such news, "is consistently ranked among the top 3 most exclusive destinations in the world. Rooms start at $5,000 per night, but we won't be staying in rooms." He paused dramatically. "We'll be in private villas." More gasps and whispers. I sat perfectly still, maintaining a neutral expression while my mind raced. This wasn't just any Sullivan property. It was our flagship, my father's pride and joy. The resort where I'd learned to snorkel, where I knew every staff member by name, where the head chef Marco still made my favourite passion fruit soulé whenever I visited. "This is an exceptional networking opportunity," Richard emphasised, clicking to the next slide. "Several industry leaders will be staying on the island during our visit. The connections we make could transform Horizon's client roster for years to come." The following slide displayed a list of attendees. I scanned it automatically, then did a double take. My name wasn't there. I rechecked, certain it was a mistake. The list included all department heads, the executive team, several mid-level managers, and even some junior staff members who were Richard's obvious favourites. But Emma Sullivan was conspicuously absent. Richard's eyes met mine briefly as he scrolled through the slide, a subtle smirk playing at the corner of his mouth before he quickly moved on to discuss logistics. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. "Departure is next Thursday morning," he said. "Julia has prepared welcome packages with all the details." He gestured to the gift bags. "If your name was on the list, please collect your package after the meeting." The remainder of the all hands passed in a blur of departmental updates and quarterly projections that I couldn't focus on. My mind kept returning to the missing name, my name, and the calculated slight it represented. When the meeting finally adjourned, I watched colleagues eagerly grab their tropical-themed gift bags, avoiding eye contact with me. I waited until the initial excitement died down before approaching Richard's office. Taking a steadying breath, I knocked on his open door with controlled professionalism. "Do you have a moment to discuss the retreat?" I asked, maintaining the pleasant, non-confrontational tone I'd perfected over years of navigating corporate politics. "Emma, of course, come in," Richard replied with exaggerated warmth, not bothering to stand. He didn't close the door, my first warning sign. "My name wasn't on the attendee list," I began evenly. "Given that I'm leading the Apex account and we exceeded our targets by 22% this quarter, I wanted to check if it was an oversight." Richard's expression shifted from false warmth to something colder, more authentic. "It wasn't an oversight, Emma. This retreat is for team members who exemplify Horizon's executive vision." "I'm not sure I understand," I said, though I understood perfectly. "How can I put this delicately?" He leaned forward, keeping his voice just loud enough to carry. "Your presence would bring down the caliber of attendees. Your work is—" He paused. "Adequate, but your overall presentation lacks the polish we need when networking with potential high-value clients." Each word was precision-engineered to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. Nothing overtly discriminatory, nothing actionable, just devastating personal criticism delivered with a veneer of professional concern. "Your presentation style is basic at best," he continued, gaining momentum. "The retreat will feature formal dinners, executive mingles. Your lackluster presence and frankly uninspired wardrobe choices would reflect poorly on Horizon." I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck but kept my expression neutral, acutely aware of colleagues in nearby cubicles pretending not to listen while absorbing every syllable. Perhaps you could use this time to develop more executive presence, Richard suggested with faux helpfulness. Maybe invest in a more professional wardrobe. Those sensible shoes and off-the-rack blazers might work for client meetings in the city, but Sullivan Island is another level entirely. The irony was almost painful. I probably knew the dress code expectations at Sullivan Island better than anyone in the building. I helped write them. I appreciate your feedback, I replied, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. Is there anything else I should focus on during your absence? The Henderson revisions, of course, and preliminary work on the Wilson holiday campaign. Nothing too strategic. Tyler will handle direction when we return. He waved dismissively. That'll be all, Emma. I walked back to my desk through what felt like an invisible corridor of judgment. As I walked through the office, colleagues suddenly seemed to find urgent reasons to check their phones or become deeply absorbed in their monitors. No one made eye contact, no one offered even the slightest sympathetic glance. It was in that moment I made my decision. For 3 years, I had suppressed my background, denied my connections, and sought validation through merit alone. And what had it gotten me? Exclusion, undermining, and public humiliation. I pulled out my phone and sent my father a second text. Let's make some arrangements for next week, but on my terms. It was time for Richard Blackwell to learn exactly whose caliber he had been questioning. That evening, my apartment felt different, smaller, as though the walls were pressing in under the weight of the day's humiliation. I kicked off my sensible pumps, tossed my supposedly inadequate blazer over a chair, and poured myself 2 fingers of the 30-year-old Malin my father had given me last Christmas, the one luxury I allowed myself behind closed doors. The amber liquid burned pleasantly as I took my first sip and stared out at the city lights. My phone buzzed on the counter. Dad was calling. "Hey, Dad," I answered, trying to sound normal but hearing the strain in my voice. "Emma." His tone was gentle but probing. "What's this about the retreat? I thought you were keeping work and family strictly separate." I sank onto my couch, suddenly exhausted. That was the plan. Until my boss decided I wasn't caliber enough to attend a retreat at our own resort. The words tumbled out, laced with more bitterness than I'd intended. Dad was silent for a moment, and I could almost picture his expression. The narrowing of his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw. The look that had made business rivals tremble. "I'll handle it," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "One call and Richard won't just be uninvited from the resort. He'll be uninvited from his job." "No." I sat up straighter. "That's exactly what I don't want. I've spent 3 years building a career without your intervention, and look where that's gotten me. Excluded and disrespected." "It's gotten me authentic experience," I countered. "If you step in now, everything I've worked for becomes meaningless. I need to handle this myself." The line went quiet, save for the distant sound of waves from his end. He was on the terrace at the main house, probably watching the sunset over the Pacific. "What do you propose?" he asked finally. "Let them come to the resort. Let events unfold naturally." I took another sip of whiskey, feeling a plan crystallize in my mind. "But I need Carlos to know I'm coming, and I need the presidential villa." Dad chuckled, his mood instantly lighter. "The presidential villa? The one you helped design? That's a $25,000 per night booking." "Precisely." For the first time that day, I smiled. "And I need you not to warn them who I am. Let me handle the reveal myself." "This sounds like the Emma I know," he said, pride evident in his voice. "The presidential villa is yours. I'll have Carlos prepare everything to your specifications." After we hung up, I didn't immediately succumb to sleep despite my exhaustion. Instead, I opened my laptop and began meticulously documenting every instance of Richard's discrimination. Every snide comment, every stolen idea, and every project reassignment. By 2 a.m., I had compiled a comprehensive record of 3 years' worth of subtle undermining and not-so-subtle dismissals. The temptation to resign immediately was strong, but that would be emotional, not strategic. Richard needed to learn a lesson, not simply lose an employee he didn't value. Horizon, despite its flaws, had other talented staff who deserved better leadership. Perhaps, I thought as I finally drifted off, this could be an opportunity for broader change. The following week was an exercise in restraint. Richard seemed to take particular pleasure in discussing retreat plans within earshot, often pausing his conversations to ask me pointed questions. "Emma, we're debating whether to go snorkeling or sailing first day. Any thoughts?" "Oh, wait," he'd smirk. "You won't be there to worry about it." Each time I'd simply smile and continue working. My apparent lack of reaction seemed to frustrate him, driving him to escalate his provocations. "The Henderson campaign looks passable," he remarked, dropping my revised mock-ups on my desk. "Work up some alternate concepts while we're gone. Should be plenty quiet around here for you to focus." "Of course," I replied pleasantly. "Anything else you need before your departure?" My calm seemed to unsettle him. He'd expected tears, resignation, or confrontation, not this measured professionalism. By Wednesday, 3 days before the retreat, he'd assigned me 4 additional projects with urgent deadlines that mysteriously coincided with the team's return. The most telling disappointment came from Margot. After our promising connection, I'd hoped she might question my exclusion or at least maintain our professional relationship. Instead, she began avoiding me entirely. Twice I caught her changing direction in the hallway upon seeing me. When we were unavoidably in the same meeting, she addressed her comments to others, even when responding to my points. It culminated Thursday afternoon when I approached her office to discuss the Apex timeline. "Not a good time," she said briskly, not looking up from her monitor. "Send me an email. I'll review it after the retreat." "I thought you wanted to be involved with Apex," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She finally looked up, her expression carefully blank. "Priorities have shifted. Richard feels the account needs a more executive approach." "I see," and I did, crystal clear. Margot had made her calculations. Aligning with the excluded employee offered less value than cementing her position with the boss. Corporate allyship at its finest. "Nothing personal," she added, already looking back at her screen, dismissing me. The sting of betrayal was sharp but clarifying. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. It was about an entire culture that rewarded the wrong values. By Friday morning, the office was buzzing with pre-retreat excitement. Colleagues compared notes on resort wear and sunscreen recommendations. A table in the break room displayed newly purchased sunglasses and sun hats as people showed off their retreat preparations. No one approached my desk or met my eyes. I maintained my composed facade while confirming final arrangements via text with Carlos, the resort manager who'd known me since I was 10. Everything was prepared exactly as requested. That evening, I received an encrypted email from my father containing dozens of high-resolution photographs of the presidential villa's recent renovation, a project I'd contributed significant design input to during my final year of college. The soaring windows overlooking the private beach, the infinity pool that seemed to blend into the ocean horizon, the 6 luxurious bedroom suites, each with a unique theme inspired by different Sullivan properties around the world. I studied each image carefully, mentally mapping out the exact space where Richard's humiliation would unfold. The grand entrance with its 20-foot ceilings, the open-concept living area where the welcome champagne would be served, and the very spot where Carlos would make the introduction that would change everything. As I packed my bag, not for the commercial flight the Horizon team would take tomorrow, but for my father's private jet which would leave 3 hours earlier, I felt an unfamiliar sensation, anticipation, without anxiety. For 3 years I had hidden my true self, seeking validation from people who judged based on appearances rather than substance. That would end tomorrow. I wasn't just reclaiming my name, I was reclaiming my worth. My phone lit up with a final text from Dad. Jet, fueled and waiting. Presidential villa prepared to your specifications. Carlos sends his regards and says revenge is best served with ocean views. I smiled and replied simply, tell him I prefer it served with clarity. Tomorrow, Richard Blackwell would learn exactly whose caliber he had been questioning. The morning arrived with perfect cinematic timing. Clear skies, a gentle breeze, and sunlight that seemed to illuminate possibilities rather than realities. The private Sullivan jet waited on the tarmac, its sleek silhouette both familiar and new in this context. For the first time in 3 years, I was fully stepping into both worlds. Emma, the marketing strategist, and Emma Sullivan, heir to a hospitality empire. Welcome aboard, Miss Sullivan, the flight attendant greeted me warmly, her professionalism a hallmark of our longest-serving staff. It's wonderful to see you again. Thank you, Diane. How's your daughter doing at UCLA? I asked, her face lighting up with surprised pleasure. She's thriving in the architecture program. I can't believe you remembered. Of course I did. Please send her my congratulations. This was the difference between genuine connection and mere performance. I actually cared about our staff and their lives. Something Richard, with all his executive posturing, would never understand. The 3-hour flight passed in peaceful preparation. Instead of my usual work attire, I'd chosen an understated yet unmistakably expensive white linen dress, gold sandals from a small Italian designer, and a single piece of jewellery, my mother's sapphire pendant, matching the Sullivan Resort signature blue. Nothing flashy, but everything quality. The look said I belonged here without screaming it. Carlos was waiting on the private landing strip when we touched down, his familiar smile as bright as the Caribbean sun overhead. "Little Emma," he exclaimed, embracing me with genuine affection before stepping back to study my face. "Not so little anymore." "Your father says you've become quite the marketing genius," he added. "Hardly a genius," I laughed. "Just hardworking and underestimated. A powerful combination." He winked and offered his arm as we walked toward the waiting golf cart. "Now tell me exactly how you want this to unfold. Your father mentioned something about an appropriate comeuppance for some very deserving individuals." For the next hour, Carlos and I meticulously planned the choreography of the afternoon's revelation. The Horizon team would arrive at 2 p.m., giving us ample time to prepare. I showed him photos of Richard so he would recognize him immediately, explained the dynamics I wanted to highlight, and emphasized one critical point. I don't want anyone fired or the retreat ruined. This isn't about destruction. It's about recalibration. Understood completely, Carlos nodded. Though I must say, your father seemed disappointed when I relayed your instruction not to accidentally lose your boss's luggage in the ocean. We shared a knowing laugh. Dad's protective instincts were legendary. By 1:30, I had taken my position in the resort's grand lobby, partially concealed behind an extravagant arrangement of native flowers and foliage. The strategic location offered perfect sightlines to the entrance, while keeping me hidden from immediate view. Carlos stood at the reception desk, reviewing final details with his staff, occasionally catching my eye with subtle nods of reassurance. At precisely 2:07 p.m., the doors swung open, and the Horizon marketing team streamed in, their faces flushed with excitement from the mild humidity. Richard led the procession, designer sunglasses perched on his head, wearing a tropical shirt still creased from its packaging. Behind him trailed the executive team, department heads, and, finally, the chosen favourites from junior ranks. "This," Richard announced dramatically, arms spread wide as though personally presenting the resort to his subordinates, "is what true luxury looks like." From my hidden vantage point, I watched as my colleagues absorbed the soaring ceilings, the hand-carved details, the panoramic ocean views, and the tasteful display of indigenous art. Phones immediately appeared as everyone began documenting their arrival, posing before they'd even properly checked in. Remember, everyone, Richard's voice carried throughout the lobby. We are representing Horizon here. I've personally stayed at Sullivan Properties before, and I can tell you they have extremely high standards. I suppressed a smile, knowing for a fact that Richard had never stayed at any Sullivan property. Our minimal digital footprint and invitation-only booking system made lying about past stays a common, but easily disproven boast. The owner himself is famously particular, Richard continued, growing bolder. Robert Sullivan and I actually discussed marketing strategies when I encountered him in Aspen last winter. My eyebrows shot up. Dad hadn't been to Aspen in over 5 years, preferring our properties in the southern hemisphere during winter months. The audacity of Richard's lie was almost impressive. When approaching staff, remember, Richard instructed, they've served actual celebrities. Act like you belong. Speaking of which, he continued, Jennifer Lawrence stayed at this very resort last month. We had a lovely chat by the infinity pool. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing outright. Jennifer Lawrence had indeed stayed recently in the same presidential villa awaiting them, but the resort's strict privacy protocols meant no other guests would have been allowed near her private pool area. Richard's fantasy world was about to collide spectacularly with reality. Carlos caught my eye and gave the subtlest nod. Showtime. He approached the group with the perfect balance of difference and authority that had made him legendary in luxury hospitality circles. Welcome to Sullivan Island Resort. I'm Carlos Mendez, General Manager. We're delighted to have Horizon Marketing with us. Richard immediately stepped forward, hand extended. Richard Blackwell, President of Horizon. I believe my assistant confirmed our arrangements for the executive ocean villas. Indeed, Mr. Blackwell, Carlos nodded politely. However, there's been a significant upgrade to your accommodations. Richard's expression shifted to calculating pleasure, likely assuming his name-dropping had somehow earned him special treatment. If you'll just allow me to greet... Carlos paused, eyes scanning the lobby before finding me. Miss Sullivan. I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement, and instantly all eyes turned in my direction. Richard's face registered confusion as Carlos walked past him and embraced me warmly. We've been eagerly anticipating your return, Carlos said loud enough for everyone to hear. Your father called personally to ensure everything is prepared to your exact specifications. The silence was absolute. I could practically hear the mental gears grinding as my colleagues processed what they were witnessing. Thank you, Carlos, I replied, matching his volume. It's wonderful to be home. Richard's face underwent a remarkable transformation, confusion melting into disbelief, then shifting to horrified recognition. The blood drained from his features so quickly that for a moment I feared he might actually faint. Emma? He managed, his voice barely a whisper. I turned to him, offering a pleasant smile. Hello, Richard. Surprise. He stumbled backward, colliding with the reception desk. A staff member reached out to steady him as he gripped the counter edge for support. But you... how... Sullivan, he stuttered, looking between Carlos and me with growing panic. Carlos, ever the consummate professional, continued as though nothing was amiss. Everyone, please follow me to the presidential villa that Miss Sullivan has graciously reserved for your company's use. The presidential villa? Margot echoed, her voice the first to break the stunned silence. Yes, Carlos confirmed cheerfully. The crown jewel of our property, $25,000 per night though, of course, there's no charge for Miss Sullivan's guests. As Carlos led the shell-shocked group toward the waiting golf carts, I fell into step beside Richard, who was still struggling to regain his composure. Don't worry, I murmured softly, for his ears only. I wouldn't dream of bringing down the caliber of attendees. After all, this is what true luxury looks like. The procession through the lobby felt surreal. I walked beside Carlos with practiced ease while my colleagues shuffled behind us like bewildered tourists. In my peripheral vision, I saw their transformation. The same people who had avoided eye contact with me for days were now attempting to catch my attention with eager smiles and nervous waves. Jason, who had been assigned to support my Apex project, actually bumped into a marble column because he was staring at me instead of paying attention to where he was going. Tyler, the other junior executive Richard had placed on my project, whispered urgently to Margot, who nodded while maintaining a frozen smile in my direction. Richard trailed slightly behind, his breathing audible, as though he had just run a marathon instead of walking across a lobby. The man who had dominated every room at Horizon now seemed physically diminished, his shoulders hunched as though he was trying to become invisible. The contrast was so striking that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Your golf carts await," Carlos announced as we exited onto a covered pavilion, where a line of luxury vehicles stood ready. "Miss Sullivan, will you be riding in the lead cart with me?" "I'd be delighted," I replied, noticing Richard step forward automatically before realizing the invitation wasn't for him. He awkwardly retreated as Carlos helped me into the front passenger seat. Our small convoy wound through the lush tropical landscape, following paths I knew by heart. As we passed a particular grove of palm trees, I turned to Carlos with genuine warmth. "The coconut palms look beautiful. Maria's team has done wonders with the landscaping this season. She'll be thrilled you noticed," Carlos replied. "She still talks about how you helped her plan the native plant restoration project when you were just 15. From the back seat, I heard a small gasp from Lisa, our HR director, who had been assigned to ride with us. Her expression in the side mirror revealed the dawning realization that my knowledge of the resort wasn't something hastily researched to impress colleagues. As we continued, I pointed out features to Carlos that I knew would be overheard. "I see Dad finally implemented my suggestion about the meditation pavilion near the East Cove. The placement catches the sunrise perfectly." "Your design input has always been valued," Carlos responded naturally. "The architects still reference your college thesis on integrative luxury spaces when discussing renovations." Each casual exchange reinforced what Richard and the others were rapidly discovering. My connection to the Sullivan brand wasn't just familial, it was foundational. I had helped shape the very paradise they had been so excited to visit, the exclusive sanctuary they had deemed me unworthy of entering. We arrived at the presidential villa, its dramatic architecture rising from the cliffside, offering breathtaking ocean views from 3 sides. The staff stood ready in a welcoming formation, the same greeting we would give to visiting heads of state or international celebrities. "Welcome to your home for the next 4 days," Carlos announced as we entered the soaring main hall, its 20-foot windows and indigenous hardwood details filling the space. "Miss Sullivan has arranged for the entire villa to be at your exclusive disposal." The collective intake of breath was audible as my colleagues absorbed the staggering luxury of the space. The infinity pool that seemed to merge with the ocean horizon, the museum-quality art collection, the multiple lounge areas with bespoke furnishings. "Carlos, would you mind if I handle the room assignments?" I asked, taking the villa's tablet from him with practiced familiarity. "I have some specific thoughts on which spaces would best suit each guest." "Of course, Miss Sullivan," he replied with the barest hint of a conspiratorial smile. I tapped through the tablet with deliberate casualness. "Let's see. Julia and Lisa, you'll be in the Ocean Master Suites." Their eyes widened at being assigned the villa's most prestigious accommodations, typically reserved for the highest-ranking executives. "Tyler and Jason, you'll have the Coral Suites with private plunge pools." One by one, I assigned the most luxurious rooms to the junior staff members who had shown me basic human decency over the years, working my way up the corporate hierarchy in reverse. Margot's expression soured as she realized she would be in one of the smaller suites, though still obscenely luxurious by any normal standard. Finally, only Richard remained unassigned. "And Richard," I said with a pleasant smile, "you'll be in the garden suite." What I didn't mention was that this particular room, while comfortable, had originally been designed for personal staff accompanying VIP guests. It was the only suite without an ocean view, overlooking the service entrance instead. "Staff will show you to your accommodations," I continued smoothly. "Please take time to refresh and relax. We'll gather for welcome cocktails on the main terrace at sunset, followed by dinner at 8. As the group dispersed, Richard approached me with the desperate smile of a drowning man spotting a distant lifeboat. "Emma. Miss Sullivan. Might I have a word in private?" I led him to a small sitting area, partially screened by tropical plants, deliberately choosing a spot where we would still be visible to others but not audible. "Emma," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding." "Really?" I kept my expression neutral. "Please, elaborate." "My decision regarding your attendance at the retreat, it wasn't what you think." He leaned forward, eyes darting nervously. "I was actually protecting you." "Protecting me?" I repeated, allowing genuine curiosity to colour my tone. "Absolutely," he said, his confidence growing with my apparent receptiveness. "I suspected you might have connections here, intuition really, from our past conversations. I was concerned that if others discovered your family ties, they might try to exploit the relationship professionally." The audacity of this transparent fabrication was almost impressive. I maintained eye contact, but offered no response, allowing the silence to stretch uncomfortably. "The comment about caliber completely misinterpreted," he continued desperately. "I meant you were above the caliber of our regular corporate retreats. Too sophisticated, really." When I still didn't respond, he added, "I've always valued your contributions, Emma. Always." I let the statement hang in the air until the silence became physically uncomfortable. "How interesting," I finally said, standing up. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check on dinner arrangements." The evening unfolded exactly as I had envisioned during those meticulous planning sessions. The welcome dinner was served on the main terrace as the sun painted the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink. The executive chef, who had taught me to make my first soufflé when I was 12, prepared a 7-course tasting menu featuring local delicacies and Sullivan's signature dishes. As we dined, I found myself genuinely enjoying the surprised expressions on my colleagues' faces when I casually discussed wine vintages, recognized subtle flavor profiles in each course, and shared anecdotes about the artists whose work adorned the villa walls. These weren't affectations or performances. They were genuine parts of myself that I had deliberately suppressed at Horizon to avoid standing out. Across the table, Richard picked at his food, making occasional contributions to the conversation that fell awkwardly flat. His usual bombastic confidence had evaporated, replaced by a painful awareness that the corporate hierarchy he had wielded so comfortably had been completely inverted in a single afternoon. By the time dessert was served, the message had been received by everyone present. True power didn't need to announce itself, and genuine accomplishment couldn't be faked. The real Emma Sullivan had finally emerged, and this time, she wasn't going anywhere. The final morning of the retreat arrived with a clarity that felt symbolic. Over the past 3 days, my colleagues had adapted to this new reality in different ways. Some, particularly the junior staff members, had flourished in an environment where their ideas were suddenly valued. Others, especially those complicit in Richard's actions, maintained a careful distance, uncertain of their position in this newly recalibrated world. Richard himself had become a mere shadow of his former self. He attended scheduled activities, but his usual domineering presence was gone, replaced by someone almost meek, a man who seemed afraid of his own shadow, more precisely afraid of mine. I was going over the day's agenda with Carlos when his face shifted to one of pleasant surprise. He looked past me toward the villa's main entrance, nodding respectfully. "It appears we have an unexpected visitor." I turned just in time to see my father walk through the grand doorway, his commanding presence instantly filling the space. At 62, Robert Sullivan was still an imposing figure, tall, fit, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that could assess both business opportunities and people with equal precision. "Dad," I exclaimed, genuinely surprised. We had agreed he would stay away to allow me to handle the situation on my own. "Good morning, sweetheart," he replied, embracing me warmly before turning to greet Carlos. I noticed the startled expressions of my colleagues at the breakfast buffet as recognition dawned. Robert Sullivan rarely appeared in public or in business publications, but when he did, it was impossible to miss him. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Dad said loudly enough for the others to hear, "but I couldn't resist seeing how Horizon Marketing is enjoying our humble accommodations." "Not at all," I replied, playing along with his humble characterization of the $25,000 per night villa. "We were just about to have breakfast. Will you join us?" "I'd be delighted," he answered. The meal that followed was a masterclass in subtle intimidation. Dad was unfailingly polite as I introduced him to each team member, but his gaze lingered just a fraction longer on those I had privately mentioned as Richard's enablers. When Richard approached with a nervous smile and extended hand, Dad's handshake was brief and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Fascinating property you have here, Mr. Sullivan," Richard offered weakly. "Thank you," Dad replied. "Though I must apologize for our communications system. The villa's microphones are surprisingly sensitive. They picked up some interesting conversations yesterday. Something about the caliber of attendees." He glanced at me with a raised eyebrow. "Technical glitch. We're working on it." Richard's face drained of colour as he realised that his private comments had been overheard. Though Dad was bluffing, our privacy standards would never allow such monitoring. Richard had no way of knowing that. As the team finished breakfast, Dad stood to address the group. "I'd like to propose a slight change to today's agenda, with Emma's permission." I nodded, curious about his next move. "Instead of the scheduled golf tournament," he continued, "I've arranged for a special team-building activity supporting the island's coral reef restoration project. It's something close to my heart, and to Emma's." He gestured toward a display set up near the terrace doors that hadn't been there earlier, photographs of previous restoration efforts, charts showing progress. I was startled to see several images of myself over the years, working alongside marine biologists and local conservationists. "What many of you may not know," Dad continued, "is that Emma has been anonymously funding similar environmental initiatives for years. In fact, the educational component of our coral nursery program was largely her design." Murmurs rippled through the group as they processed this new information. The Emma they thought they knew, the one they'd judged as lacking caliber, had been quietly making significant contributions while seeking no recognition. After breakfast, the team changed into appropriate attire and headed to the Marine Conservation Centre, where local experts guided them through preparing coral fragments for transplantation. I found myself working alongside junior team members, now eager to engage with me, asking thoughtful questions about both the conservation project and my marketing insights. During a break, I noticed Richard standing alone at the edge of the beach, staring out at the horizon. The moment had arrived. I walked over carrying a folder I had retrieved from my room. "Beautiful view," I commented, standing beside him. He flinched slightly, then nodded. "Emma, Before he could say anything else, I interrupted gently. "I'd like you to review these documents." I handed him the folder containing my meticulously compiled evidence: emails, meeting notes, project reassignments, patterns of discrimination, and instances where my ideas had been attributed to others. He flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from defensive to defeated as he recognized the undeniable pattern of his actions and words. "I could present these to the board," I said quietly, "or file a formal complaint." "You're going to destroy me," he whispered. "No," I replied. "That was never my intention. I'm offering you something else." "Redemption?" His head snapped up in surprise. "Mandatory sensitivity training. A complete restructuring of Horizon's advancement policies to ensure transparency and merit-based promotion. and your public support for these changes. And if I refuse? Then yes, these documents go to the board, but I'm hoping you'll choose growth over destruction. The silence between us stretched, filled only by the sound of waves and distant voices from our colleagues. Why? He finally asked. Why offer me a way out after everything?